Nokia and Lumia, that's not the case anymore. Instead, it's now Microsoft taking the helm. The change became more pronounced during Mobile World Congress 2015 earlier this year, where both the Lumia 640 and the 640 XL were unveiled at Microsoft's press conference. Now, rather than attacking the high-end market, Microsoft has opted instead to steer towards the entry-level segment so far. The Lumia 640 is exactly that. But we're kind of curious to know if it's something that can pique the interest of consumers, especially with its hard-to-beat pricing of $130 as a prepaid option. Hey guys, John V from PhoneArena here, and you're watching our video review of the Microsoft Lumia 640. Following in tradition, the Lumia 640's design is distinctive and colorful. While it's built as an affordable entry-level offering, the Lumia 640 doesn't fall victim to the handful of cheapo phones that are designed terribly. Rather, there's a pleasant balance here, as it features the Lumia's signature brightly colored plastic body. Now from the front, it appears to exude a soft rectangular shape, but the rounded corners and high gloss finish of its casing definitely adds some pep and pop to the design, enough to make it a visually appealing smartphone. This is slapped with a modest-sized 5-inch 720 by 1280 clear black IPS LCD display with Gorilla Glass 3. Even though tiny text is still discernible from a normal viewing distance, it clearly lacks the sharpness, detail, and intensity that other higher resolution screens produce. Still, other aspects about the display reveal that it's just your ordinary and average thing. In particular, that includes its 6930 Kelvin color temperature and gamma value of 2.25, which are within decent range of the expected marks of 6500 Kelvin and 2.2 respectively. So what does that all say? Well, it merely tells us that the screen exhibits a subtle colder tone, and that various shades of gray are represented accurately. Unfortunately, its 352 nit luminance makes it a poor candidate for visibility under bright conditions. Add to that, its viewing angles are rather weak and shows visible distortion. Factoring everything, the Lumia 640's display is just a conventional, run-of-the-mill display. In standard fashion, the Lumia 640 is running Windows Phone 8.1 with Lumia Denim in tow, which means it's accompanied with Cortana integration and the entire suite of Lumia branded apps. Peers of the platform will find it familiar naturally, seeing that the experience is identical to every other phone running this version of Windows Phone. We won't get into the specifics of it all, but we could simply say that it's always a work in progress, in the way that it's still reaching or even catching up to its peers, but at least has that base functionality to compete, like having Microsoft Office to ensure we can create and edit documents and spreadsheets while on the road. Oh yeah, it's on tap to receive Windows 10 update when it comes out too, so there's peace of mind there. The Snapdragon 400 chip with 1GB of RAM it has on the inside might seem insignificant, but for basic purposes, it's more than enough to give it the same level of responsiveness as other Windows phones. However, there are times when apps take some time to load. Not surprisingly too, is that the phone's performance suffers when it comes to gaming. For this mildly spec'd Lumia 640, it's been outfitted with an 8-megapixel sensor with an f2.2 aperture lens and a single LED flash. Around the front, there's a 0.9 megapixel front snapper. No doubt these specs won't impress too many people, but then again, that's never the true telling of its capabilities. Running the Lumia camera app, it's the same style and layout we're familiar with seeing on past devices. Although it appears simplistic by nature from the onset, sliding the on-screen shutter key to the left reveals its full manual mode, where every parameter can be modified, including the focus and shutter speed. Image quality from the 8-megapixel camera is passable, but nothing extraordinary. Sure, it's sufficient enough for 4x6 printouts, but we wouldn't recommend trying to crop photos and make printouts out of them. Using its rich tone mode, it's able to compensate contrasting areas where hard lighting blends with darker areas of the scenery, but in the process, it's obvious that it favors an extremely artificial looking composition. Under low light, it underperforms due to its smudgy details and bland colors. Now switching over to its 1080p video capture, we're not particularly won over by the results either. Details are somewhat sparse in intensity, but more pressing is how its white balance seems to be overly sensitive, as it can go from having a saturated color tone to being bland and washed out. Adding to that, the audio recording is rather thin sounding. When it comes to music, we have two options to choose from: the usual Xbox Music app or Mix Radio. Unfortunately, the audio quality from its rear speaker is pretty shrill in tone, almost as if it's straining, and it's somewhat underpowered at 68.7 decibels. Luckily, it handles video playback better, just as long as you're looking at the display straight on, because distortion pops up at various angles. It's not terrible, but it can be a distraction with its washed out looks. For the most part, the Lumia 640 handles phone calls with reasonable quality, so voices have enough emphasis on our end, while callers experience something similar on their end. Our only complaint though relates to the slightly low volume output of its speakers, which can be troublesome under noisy conditions. In our experience, its 2500 mAh battery isn't the beefiest thing around, but regardless of that, it's more than ample to power us through a solid 1 day of normal usage. Therefore, it's at a level we feel to be average. Power users, however, will surely challenge its longevity. Everyone is eagerly awaiting for the next generation Lumia smartphone, the one that's specs heavy, features rich, and heavy-handed against the competition. The Microsoft Lumia 640 isn't that handset. Rather, it's on the other side of the spectrum, where it's an entry-level, low-cost handset meant for basic use. In that regard, the Lumia 640 is a strong performer, especially if we factor in its $130 cost as a prepaid option courtesy of Cricket Wireless. This phone isn't for everyone, naturally, but for those who have been disappointed by comparable entry-level Android phones, this is surely a smart option to think about from the Windows Phone camp. It's cheap, but not cheap in the way that the experience is dramatically compromised.